Hello and welcome back to Microsoft Server Administration 2. My name is Nick. The topic of the video is Operations Master Roles, which I sometimes call FSMO or Flexible Single Master Operations, FSMO. So what are Operations Master Roles? Let's look at Active Directory in general. Active Directory is a multi-master replication database. What I mean by that is multi-master means that it can have more than one server providing the services of Active Directory. And replication means that to accomplish the goal of more than one server providing service, information about the database has to be replicated to keep the database in sync. Now, there are certain things in Active Directory, certain roles that are best performed on a single server so that information does not conflict. And what I mean by that is in our particular network, we have two domain controllers. We have HQ DC1 and Chicago DC1. Now this is in my lab network. Yours will be slightly different, obviously. Now there are 5 roles, operations master roles in an Active Directory environment or an Active Directory forest and domain. And normally all 5 of them are held on one server. Now, say if one of these servers did something that this server didn't know about, then we would have a situation where certain things in the database will be inconsistent, and that could cause corruption in our Active Directory environment. We do not want that. So there are certain things that are best performed on a single server and him be the only one responsible for it, so someone else doesn't try to do it and cause some kind of a conflict. Those 5 things are called operations master roles, and we actually split those up between forest-wide and domain-wide. The forest-wide domain, the forest-wide operations master roles are called domain naming master and schema master. Now the domain naming master is what it sounds like. It keeps up with domain names to make sure they are unique. And the schema master is responsible for making changes to the Active Directory schema. And we'll talk about what the schema is in just a few minutes. The domain-wide roles are RID master. RID stands for relative identifier. And the RID, or the RIDs, are actually identifiers for objects in Active Directory. Every object has a RID associated with it, and it's the RID master's job to keep up with those RIDs, make sure we have plenty to go around and they are not being duplicated. The infrastructure master tracks changes to things in other domains that are members of groups that are part of this domain. Okay, so we have cross-domain groups such as universal groups and those types of things, and make sure that any changes to those groups that are members of multiple domains plus this domain, it's a domain-wide role, making sure those changes are applied correctly. The PDC also stands for Primary Domain Controller Emulator. We say PDC emulator role and not PDC master. Emulates the primary domain controller. Also make sure that passwords are handled properly. Group policy, which we'll talk about a little bit later, it handles some of the group policy. It is also the time server. It handles time. Time is very important to Active Directory. Kerberos relies on a certain time, and it has a tolerance of a certain number of minutes that your time can be out of sync to the domain controller. And the domain master browser searching things in Active Directory. So these are some of the roles that are best performed by a single server in the network, a single domain controller, I should say. For instance, if we had multiple servers handing out relative identifiers, there's a high possibility that one of those relative identifiers could be duplicated and cause corruption. So we really need just one server handling that. Otherwise, we have this too many chiefs and not enough Indians type situation. So let's look at some of the ways we can work with the operations master roles. Now, typically, like I said before, they are usually held by a single server. And we're going to have a look first at the domain-wide roles. So the RID master, infrastructure master, and PDC emulator. We're going to go to our primary domain controller, which in my case is HQ-DC1. And I'm going to pull up Active Directory users and computers. This is where we can find the domain-wide operations master roles. I'm going to expand this column out a little bit so you can see the whole thing there. And if I right-click on my domain, I can choose operations masters. And I can look at the different operations masters that live at the domain level, since I am looking at my domain at this time. Now, whichever server you are looking at this from is the server that you could transfer that role to if you wanted a different server to take responsibility for a particular role. For instance, I am currently logged into HQ-DC1. So if I go into the operations masters section here in my domain and look at the RID master, it gives me the option to transfer the operations master role to a different computer. Okay, why would I want to do that? Well, maybe I want to offload some of the responsibility to a different server. Maybe I want to, I'll say diversify, but what I really mean is provide a little bit of fault tolerance. In case this one server goes down, all 5 of my operations master roles don't go with it. So kind of spread it out a little bit. So whichever server I'm logged into, or whichever server I am viewing the Active Directory console with at the time, is the server that this change button will be effective to. So transfer the operations master to the following computer, and it populates that field with whichever computer I am looking at Active Directory with at this time, which currently is HQ-DC1. So that is not actually moving the role. That wouldn't do anything for me. So what I'm going to do is close this here, and if I wanted to transfer a role to my secondary domain controller, which is Chicago-DC1, I could log into Chicago DC1 over here and go to Active Directory users and computers and work with it from there. Or I could right-click on my Active Directory users and computers heading here and say change domain controller. Since it's all the same database anyway, I can control Active Directory with any server that is a domain controller, and the changes will replicate throughout. So I can change domain controller to be working on the copy of Active Directory database that lives on Chicago DC1 and press OK, and now we see up here that I am connected to Chicago DC1's copy of Active Directory, and I can once again right-click on the domain name, go to Operations Masters, and boom, I have the ability now to transfer this role to Chicago-DC1 since I am now connected to that domain controller. Now, I don't want to really transfer the RID master at this point. I would rather transfer the infrastructure master. Remember, he's the guy who keeps up with group membership and group changes of groups that live in different domains. Okay, so I could change him right now if I wanted to. And it's simply a question of clicking the change button. Are you sure? And yes, the operations now master role was successfully transferred, and now the infrastructure master belongs to Chicago-DC1. So it is really that simple to transfer domain level operations master roles. Now, what about these forest-wide operations master roles? We have domain naming and schema master. Well, let's look once again in Active Directory here. We're going to close that. The forest-wide roles are not available in the Active Directory Users and Computers console. Rather, they are available in Start Administrative Tools and Active Directory Domains and Trusts. This will actually let us look at our domains. And I'm going to maximize this window, and we're going to expand that out. Once again, we see that we are connected currently to HQ-DC1. The same kind of rules will apply here, in that whichever domain controller I'm connected to in this console is the server I could transfer a role to from the dialog box here. So I can right click there and choose Operations Master, and the only Operations Master role I can see at the forest level in this console is Domain Naming Operations Master, and we actually see that right here. Domain Naming Operations Master. So I could change the role holder for this particular Operations Master role, and we see that these two are the same server. Current owner, and who would you like to change it to, whichever domain controller you're currently connected to in this console. So if I wanted to be able to change that role, I could simply just change the Active Directory domain controller, which is right here, and choose my Chicago DC1. Now I'm connected to that one, and I can right click once again on my Active Directory, choose Operations Master, and now my option here is changed to Chicago-DC1, and I could change that role if I wanted to. Close on that. Now you may be wondering, there are two forest-wide Operations Master roles. One of them is Domain Naming Master. We just saw that one. What about the Schema Master? Why couldn't I see that in this console here when I went to Operations Master? Well, there's a good answer for that, and the reason is the Active Directory schema is extremely complex, and you really don't want to mess with it unless you really know what you're doing. You've seen those Microsoft TechNet articles that guide you through changing the registry, right? And they always have a warning there that says, warning, if you do these steps wrong, you could hose your computer, and we're not going to take responsibility for it. Okay? Well, the Active Directory schema makes the Windows registry look like a baby's toy. That's the level of complexity we're talking about here. Okay? So they hide the Operations Master role for the Active Directory schema. Matter of fact, they hide the schema console altogether, and you have to know where to find it. So I'm going to show you how to find it. So I'm going to use my second domain controller here. I've already done a few things on my primary domain controller that would you need to see, but I'm going to do mmc.exe to open a blank Microsoft Management Console, and I'm going to add the Active Directory schema snap-in to it. But here's the problem. It's not there. Active Directory Domains and Trusts, Active Directory Sites and Services, Active Directory users and computers. I don't have the Active Directory schema. It would probably be right here before sites and services. So how do I get it there? Well, there's a reason for that. Once again, Microsoft hides this very well. Okay, so I have to initialize the schema console by registering a DLL file. That command is reg svr32, and the DLL's name is schmgmt, short for schema management .dll. Reg server 32 schema management.dll. Press enter, and DLL register server has succeeded for that particular DLL file. Now, if I go to File, Add Remove Snap-in, there is my Active Directory Schema Management Console. Microsoft hid it from us. We had to unhide it. So I'm going to add that to our console here and press OK. And now we have our Active Directory Schema Management Console. And here's this complexity we're talking about. We can open our classes and see all kinds of good stuff, okay, that we really have no idea what it means. And Microsoft kind of does that on purpose. You almost have to study just the Active Directory schema for a long time to understand it. What the schema is, and I'll take a quick aside here, I won't take too long. If I go to any other part of Active Directory and I look at, say, a user account, and I go to the properties of a user account, I see all these tabs and all these fields that contain information about the object that I'm looking at. So the general information, the address information, so a member of, so what groups they're a member of, everything in here, all these properties and information about the objects that I'm looking at. All those properties and all that information about the objects is contained in the schema. The schema is simply a grouping of properties about every object in Active Directory. Okay? That's what the schema does. It keeps up with all those properties and attributes of all of our objects. And so the schema master role in Active Directory is the server that's responsible for keeping up with all of those properties and attributes. So I am currently on my Chicago-DC1 server. So actually no, it looks like I am connected to HQ-DC1. I believe the reason for that is HQ-DC1 currently holds the schema master role. So I can right click that and choose Operations Master, and there I have the ability to change the server holding the schema master role. And since I'm connected here to HQ-DC1, even though I'm logged in on the Chicago-DC1 server, in this console I'm connected to HQ-DC1, so I don't really have the opportunity to change the server holding that because the destination server is not any different from what is currently holding it. So I can close and once again change domain controller, choose my Chicago DC1 out of the list, and it's telling me here that I can look at the schema, but I can't change the schema if I'm connected to the Chicago DC1 because the Chicago DC1 doesn't have that role. He's not in charge of the schema. But I can look at it all day long. So there I can look at it. I'm on the Chicago DC1. Now I can go to Operations Master and it will actually let me change it to this server if I so choose. So this is the Operations Masters. Once again, I sometimes refer to this as FSMO. What I mean by FSMO is Let me go back over here and use my whiteboard tool here. FSMO, FSMO, stands for Flexible Single Master Operation. That's kind of a term that I carried over from Windows Server 2003 administration. Now they are called Operations Master, but I often refer to them as FSMO roles. It's just something that I've always done. So, um, as always, if there are any questions about Operations Master roles, how to transfer them, and things of that nature, write your questions down, bring them to class, or simply shoot me an email and we'll discuss your questions. Now, there are obviously other ways to transfer Operations Master roles. In Windows, there's a gazillion ways to do everything. One of the other ways to transfer Operations Master's roles is using the command line. And I think your lab has information or an exercise on doing that if you so choose to do the challenge part of it. So definitely a fun time. I will see you in class and thank you for watching.